Hi everyone and welcome. Today I will be discussing 10 amazing fantasy standalones that I think you should put on your TBR. I think that fantasy standalones are perfect if you are a fantasy veteran and you're looking for something quick to read in between the multiple series that you're currently in the middle of. But I think it's also perfect for when you're new to the genre. Because fantasy can be a little bit intimidating, you have world building, you have sometimes a difficult magic system, and more often than not, you also have a big cast of characters. But with a standalone, at least you don't need to remember this over the course of multiple books. Now, because this is a list for new fans and fantasy veterans, I do have some big names of the genre on this list, because if you're new, you might want to check these out. But I think I also have some hidden gems throughout the list, so there's something for everyone. And the last thing I want to mention is that yes, this is a part 1, because I do plan to continue to read more fantasy series, so each time I have a batch of 10 fantasy standalones that I think are worthy of recommendation, I will make a next part. But now, without further ado, let's get to the first book. And the first recommendation that I have is this big name that I talked about in the introduction, and that is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. So this is a standalone in his Cosmere universe, and in this world you have breaths. Everybody has one breath, but you can accumulate multiple ones. What you can do with this breath is basically give some of those multiple breaths that you have to an inanimate object and make it do stuff for you. So this is already a pretty interesting and unique magic system, something that Brandon, of course, is known for. In this book, you follow two sisters, and in their kingdom, yes, you of course also have these breaths, but they basically see this as part of the soul, so they don't do magic with them. Everybody keeps their one breath. However, one of these sisters is going to be married off to one of the god kings in a neighboring kingdom. And there, this magic is definitely used, and the god kings have multiple, if not thousands of breaths, so they are very powerful. Normally, the eldest sister was going to be married off, and she was training for this her whole life. She knows a lot about the culture that she's going to. But at the last moment, her father announces that he's going to keep his favorite daughter close, and he's actually going to send his youngest daughter, who doesn't know anything about the culture. So you already have this, that you follow this young daughter, and you follow her interaction with this god king that she's marrying. But you also have other gods, and one of them actually doesn't believe that he is a god, which is actually very funny. And his humor, sometimes Sanderson just clicks with me, sometimes it doesn't. But in this one, I did think that this was a funny touch. This is a very fast-paced story. You have twist after twist, and I really enjoyed it. I think that it's perfect if you're new to fantasy. But if you're not new to fantasy and you just like unique magic systems, you need to try this one. Next up, I want to recommend one of my favorite reads of 2021, and that is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Kornicek. This is a Norse myth retelling, and in that it's already quite different from my last recommendation, because here, of course, the fantasy aspect is more that you are following mythological creatures and you don't really have a hard magic system like what you have in Sanderson's works. In this book, you follow Angerboda, and Angerboda was actually the mother of multiple of Loki's children, but in the Norse mythologies, you only hear about her briefly, maybe a couple of lines, and that's it. In this book, you get her entire life story, and I loved it. You also have Loki, of course. Loki is a gender-fluid character in this book. You have a sapphic romance, so you have a lot of representation, which I loved, but other than that, the story was just really captivating. I must say that I don't really know the original story, or I didn't know it going in, and that's something that I quite enjoy most of the time. I actually have a spoiler-free review for this book, and there I recommend it and compare it to another adult fantasy standalone that I would also recommend. And that is Circe by, of course, Madeline Miller. So this is much more well-known. This is a Greek myth retelling, and here you also follow a witch, but from Greek mythology's Circe. She was the daughter of Helios, and she was sent away to an island. And in this one, you also follow her life story. So these two are often compared to another. They are quite similar. I would say if you like Norse mythology, start with this one. If you like Greek mythology, give this one a try, but both of these are definitely well worth your time. Next up, I have another book that I completely adored, but I wouldn't recommend it to fans who are new to the genre. This is definitely one if you've read a couple of fantasy books, maybe even series, and you're well acquainted with world building, then maybe try this one. But if you're new, I would suggest trying something else from the list. And that is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This is an Asian-inspired book, and in this one you follow a mother and her son when their city is under attack. Now, the reason that I say that I wouldn't recommend this to fans new to the genre is that you have a lot of world building and a lot of info dumping in the first 100 pages. And that actually made it difficult for me to get through. You have a lot of specific in-world words that you just need to remember from the get-go, and otherwise you will have to go back a couple of times to see what that meant exactly in order for you to be able to continue. After those 100 pages, it takes a very fast turn, and I would say that the info dumping stops there. I think that this is an emotional book. I think that it's very important to read. You have an older character, a mother, it deals with grief, it deals with so many important themes that I cannot do anything else than recommend it. I think that apart from those 100 pages, it's a 5-star read. But those first 100 pages are difficult to get through. Now, after that recommendation, I did want to recommend a book that is also perfect for fans new to the genre, and that is Raise the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst. I actually think if you like Brandon Sanderson and his easy writing style as well as unique magic system, this book would be perfect for you. Especially if you're used to YA fantasy and you want to dip your toes into adult fantasy, the writing style here is very easygoing and easy to get into. In this world, there is reincarnation. And if you've been a very bad person, you will reincarnate as a Keyhawk or a monster, and this is an example of these monsters. The only way that you can then reincarnate back into a human and not always come back as a Keyhawk is to win a race. If this happens, the augurs, which are priests in this world, can make you reincarnate into a human. In this book, we follow a trainer of Keyhawks who desperately needs money to help her daughter, and we are following a girl who has left her family because they tried to marry her off to an abusive husband. She is going to train to become a racer in the race, and she meets this trainer. So of course, match made in heaven. I greatly enjoyed this book. I actually have a full spoiler-free review that I will link in the cards and in the description box down below if you want to know more. Next up, I have a very short book that I want to recommend to you, and that is Ring Child by P. Jelly Clark. Now, this is fantasy, but it definitely has some horror elements. And as I said, it's a short book. It's actually a novella, 150 pages, so if you're looking for something very quick to read, this is perfect. I actually love this because of the premise and how unique it is. This story takes place in the beginning of the 20th century in the US. And of course you have the Ku Klux Klan, but a part of the Ku Klux Klan members are actual monsters. And you have some people who are able to see the monsters for what they are. We are following a small group of these black characters who can see these monsters and are hunting them. So that already sounds pretty badass. This is definitely fast-paced. Sometimes it was a little bit too fast-paced to my liking, but the premise was so interesting, the ending was explosive, and I felt so connected to the characters, which is something that I'm always surprised by if such a short book can make me feel a lot of things. So just for that, I highly recommend it. Next up, I want to recommend a book that has great representation. So if you're looking for that, look no further. And that is The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. This is a fantasy story set in the medieval times. You have Merlin, you have dragons, you have castles, you have knights. What more do you want? In this story, we follow Silence. Silence was born as a girl, but her father wanted a boy to inherit, so he raises them as a boy. And in the beginning, Silence doesn't even notice. They just think that they are a boy. But as they grow up, they do realize that they are very much different from the other boys, and they find out what actually happened. And now they are a little bit worried. What if they want to become a knight? What if they want to have children? What if they need to inherit? What if somebody finds out? So you basically follow them in this coming of age story that's of course very different from other boys and girls that they meet. I think that this was heartwarming, also difficult at times. I think that this had maybe a little bit more humor than I was expecting, but in the end it worked, and I would definitely recommend this one. Next up, I have a recommendation that OG fantasy fans will definitely know of, but if you're new to fantasy, I do think that somebody should tell you about this book, and that is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it takes place in a malevolent forest. A magical forest. This is one of my favorite tropes. Of course, I am going to recommend this. So, around this forest, people live in villages, and these villages are protected by somebody that they call the dragon, but this is just some sort of wizard who lives in a tower. And he protects these people, but in return, he wants a girl living with him for 12 years. Basically, a sort of apprentice, you could say. After this 12 years, this girl can leave, and he takes somebody else to live with him. Of course, we start following this girl who needs to go and live with him, and we follow them as they basically fight against this magical forest. I really enjoyed this book. I must say that I like Naomi Novik's other works maybe a little bit better, but The Magical Forest will always win if I need to recommend something. I didn't really like the romance in this one, but I must say if you're looking for a Beauty and the Beast retelling with a heavy focus on the romance, you're not going to find this here. The romance is maybe 5 to 10%. I know that a lot of people love it. I wasn't really completely there for it, but because it was only a small part of the story, I still really enjoyed where this was going. Then for my second to last recommendation, I have another Greek myth retelling, and that is The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. Now, I do know that Natalie Haynes has written a bunch of Greek myth retellings, but this is the only one that I've read and I absolutely adore it, so I definitely recommend it, even to beginning fantasy fans, because I do think that it's very accessible. In this book, you follow two women that, again, play a role in Greek mythology, but they only get a very small part, while in this one, the entire book revolves around them. First of all, we follow Jocasta, and Jocasta is actually the woman who married her son, so it's a retelling of Oedipus. And then we also follow Ismene, but I won't really tell you what the relationship between Ismene and Jocasta or Ismene and Oedipus is, because that would be a spoiler and you basically figure this one out throughout the book. Of course, if you already know the Greek myths, you know this, but I went in blind and I'm not going to spoil it for you if you're going in blind as well. As I said, I think that this is amazing. I actually like this one more than Circe, but I do know that a lot of people love Circe. So I would say if you like one or the other, then pick up the other one because it's amazing. And then for my last recommendation, I have Sister Song by Lucy Holland. This is a retelling of a British folk ballad. I went in completely blind and I would advise you to do the same because you don't want to get spoiled for the ending of this book. In this book, we follow the three children of the king in the early medieval ages of Britain. On the one hand, Britain is going to be invaded by the Saxons, so you do have that threat. But on the other hand, you do have the new religion, Christianity. And this is personalized in this book by a priest that lives in this kingdom and who has a very big impact on the king and on politics. And these three children, who are all seen as women, do feel like they are very confined by this and almost trapped in their home. You have one girl who can cure others, but she cannot cure herself. Then you have one who is looking for love, and the last one wants to be king. But for this, she needs to go through her own personal journey. I really love this. I think that it's very magical. You have a druid type character here. You have nature-based magic, which is something that I absolutely adore. And you have a great representation of a trans or maybe non-binary character. And I definitely enjoyed their journey and how they came to one's own. So yeah, definitely recommend this one as well. So these were the 10 fantasy standalones that I wanted to talk about today. Please let me know what you thought of these recommendations. Maybe you already read a couple of these books. Let me know your thoughts. Or if you now want to pick up some of these, also let me know in the comments down below. As always, I hope that you enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!